Hey everyone, welcome back to Story Impact. I'm Lisa Tolles. This series, as you know, is about authors, but not just about their published books. I'm delving deeper to understand how they write, why they write, and what keeps them going. I want to know what inspires them, what they've learned on their writing path, and what they hope to leave with their readers. As well as being your host for the series, I'm also a crime novelist, and you can find my books on Amazon and on lisatolles.com. So Michael Deeze retired as a physician after 35 years in private practice. His life experiences are numerous, and he held many occupations before pursuing a healthcare education and career. In his storied life, he's visited every state and worked on 5 continents. I want to ask him about that later. He's also a public speaker and has served as a professor and administrator for a major university. Mike is an amazingly gifted storyteller, and I couldn't be happier to be here with him today. Mike, warmest welcome.
Good to be here.
So, all right, Deathbed Confessions, your latest book. What a fascinating premise. Let's start there and start by telling me about Harry Beach and what Harry Beach is doing in this novel.
What Beach is doing is dying, and but he's doing it with grace and candor, and he's a lifetime criminal, sort of a kingpin in the Chicago syndicate, and he is on. He's a lifer. He's been sentenced to prison for life, consecutive life sentences, because his crimes were so heinous. But now he's getting out of prison because he's dying. And as a result of what Harry did for a living, there are a lot of cases open that still have his name on them in one way or another. And he had managed to avoid prosecution, and the crimes are unsolved. So they assign a FBI probationary officer to sit with him and hopefully get him to um, give the clues that will solve the crimes that are still open, and do it in a race for time against when Harry dies.
Wow. Is this book based on a true story? Is it based on any cases that you know of, or is it pure fiction?
It is a complete fabrication, and I might add, it's all your fault.
My fault? Okay, this ought to be good. Let's hear it.
Well, as you know quite well, about 18 months ago, you and I and a couple of other authors were challenged to a writing duel. And we were supposed to come up. There were 6 authors, I believe. And we were supposed to come up with an on-the-spot story premise that we thought we could write about that would catch readers' attention. And so, in the 5 minutes that they gave us, or something like that, this story came right out of the ether. And so, over the course of the next month, as this contest progressed, one by one, the authors were sent home. And at the end, there were only 2 left standing. One was you, of course, with your polished approach and deadly storylines, and me fabricating this one out of thin air and trying to keep up with you. And so the really good news is you won, and deservedly so. By the time the time was up, you had a finished product that was polished and ready to go, and I was, still bumbling along. But I'm happy to say that I finished it after. Once the contest was over, I set it aside, and I didn't look back at it again for about 6 months, I don't think. It wasn't until it was winter and there was snow on the ground and I couldn't go outside and play that I decided to sit down and write again,
Mm.
and ended up finishing that story. So that's where it came from. That's a long story for a short answer.
I think you should have won, by the way, and I think that we weren't like starting in the same place because I have to say, my book, I had a first draft of that book. It was just a crappy first draft, but I had like a finished product. Yours was completely made up and really represents just the power of pure creativity. You like dreamed Harry Beach and that whole plot out of the ether. So that brings me to my next question. You said that this book is not based on a true story, but let's dig a little deeper to that question. Is there really any such thing as fiction? I mean, like in some way, we're pulling from what we've seen, what we've read, what we've watched, we're influenced. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think you're exactly right. Um, you, first of all, you cannot write unless you put some of yourself into the book. Um, yeah, I think that's we always talk about what our legacy needs to be, or are we leaving a legacy, or is there any evidence that we walk the earth? And some people build skyscrapers, and some people uh, do magnificent things, but most people just live ordinary lives that are worthy of note. But when you sit down to write, um, it's really your narrative, and the imagination that you use. You still have to have something to stick it to. It has to have some resonance with some part of you. Otherwise, um, you know, otherwise it's too thin. It's almost transparent in its substance,
Mm.
and so you create the scenery and you put color into the drapes, and you know position the potted plants and all those other things, which are all based on what your knowledge is. And so you're putting yourself into all the stories, and even the most fantastical stories that we create. I've written another series of books that is about witches and fantasies and
I know.
dire wolves and all of that stuff. And even though you're writing about something that's fantastical, you're really just talking about you.
Mm. I love that. I'm going to listen to that answer again, and yeah, there's so much wisdom in that. And I do want to talk about the Annie Abbott books that you write with your daughter, but right now I want to veer into another direction because I'm so curious about the intersection of art and medicine. Has the physician part of you influenced your storytelling?
Yeah, but not in the way that you would think.
Oh,
Um, Medical practice is medical practice, and there are protocols, and there are ways of dealing with things, and the playbook is pretty standard. Everybody's got the playbook, and if you don't know the answer, somebody else does. But no, there's one wild card that is in every condition, every disease, every symptom, and the wild card is the patient. And and so one of the things that plays in all of my stories, my stories are very dialogue heavy.
hmm.
I don't know if you've noticed that,
Yes.
but there's a lot of dialogue because dialogue fascinates me, and uh, it's such a window into a person's personality. What their choice of dialogue and the direction of their dialogue is. And so dealing with, you said 35 years of practice, it was really 40
Mm.
um, by the time it got all over, um, is if you see 30 patients a day or 40 patients a day, that's 40 conversations about the weather, about what's going on in politics, about, what's your mother up to, what are your kids up to, and everything else. And it's learning to find a way into the patient's head so that all patients will tell you what what's wrong with them and usually what the cure is if you just take the time to listen to them.
Mm.
But you've got to get them talking about it. And nowadays, with a 2-minute appointment and 5 minutes to your prescription,
Totally.
that sort of thing, we've lost the ability to know the family, know the parents, know the children and the grandchildren, and all of those things. I was lucky enough to be in family practice and in a small town, and so we did know everybody, and so it's easier to get people talking about, you know, when they say they come in and they say, "Well, doctor, it hurts when I do this," and you say, "Well, don't do that anymore," and usually the answer is just that simple. It's just, well, stop it. Don't do that. If you can't stand your wife, you need to get out of there. Sooner or later, one of your organs is going to shut down because you're so busy despising this person.
Mm.
Well,
Mm.
and uh, so the thing that I noticed, to get back to your original question, is the one thing that medical practice did teach me was the importance of seeing every single person exactly where they are and taking them for exactly what they are and letting the dialogue run out, taking the time to let a person be a person and and to tell you what's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, so you mentioned dialogue. Yes, your books are very dialogue heavy and your dialogue is very realistic. It just like I whip through it. I feel like I'm like standing there in the room. You must be a longtime people watcher, or how did you learn how to craft dialogue that's so realistic to how people actually talk? Because it's actually very hard. It's harder than it seems.
But, it's one of those things where, um, well, for one thing, I'm a pretty good bullshitter. And so, when you're um, trying to get people to talk to you and talking to people, um, letting them express themselves is the hardest part. But if you can you have to put yourself in the center of the dialogue. Okay. You have to be the speaker. And it creates a little bit of schizophrenia because you have to be both people on both sides of the dialogue. But if you have an idea of where you want to go with it, then it's just a matter of how many words do you want to use to get there.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Um, so let's talk about Annie Abbott and let's talk about writing books with your daughter.
I ask, can I add one more thing to the other thing?
Yeah, yeah.
When you're writing dialogue, you can't be in a hurry.
Mm,
You can't be trying to get done with this dialogue so you can move on to the meat and potatoes of the situation. You have to write the dialogue and you have to let the person say everything that he needs to say in order to get to the meat and potatoes
hmm
of the situation.
hmm
So you have to be patient with yourself and make sure that you don't cut yourself off
hmm And
just
patient,
because you don't like to write dialogue.
well, patient with your characters too. I mean, like I'm sure you found that like you think you're at the end of a scene, you think that you're at the end of a conversation. Oh, and come to find out you're not. Your character is like kind of pushing, revealing more and pushing the story along.
Right. And what drives those comments? Not only what's he saying, but what's he thinking about while he's saying it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So thinking about some of the dialogue between Thomas Quinn the investigator, and Harry Beach in Deathbed Confessions. What do you think those two learned from each other?
I think that uh, well, Thomas learned a lot about how to deal with people. Um, the whole book is an educational process for Thomas Quinn. He for all of his experience beforehand, he was not ready for all the lessons that were going to need to be done.
Hmm.
And so the whole thing was a learning experience for him. And I think um, he emerges at the end of the book um, with a greater appreciation for the nuance of life. I think that's fair. That there's not a black and white line. I think he went into it thinking there was black and white and truth and justice in the American way. And what he discovered was everything is gray.
A gray area. Yeah. All right, so now let's talk about Annie Abbott. Tell our viewers who Annie Abbott is and about that extraordinary series.
Oh, gracious. Uh, I'm trying to write the third book right now, and
Oh,
I'm uh, I'm in a terrible block.
mm,
Some people are very organized and they do outlines and they map their story line and stuff like that. And I more or less let the story play itself out. And if there's a tangent to go on, if it looks like it's something good, then I'll take the tangent.
hmm
And
hmm
but the story of Annie Abbott is it's sort of a near and dear to my heart story. Um, my daughter and I was divorced when my daughter was pretty young, and when she was 8, and she was my tail ender quite a ways. Her youngest brother is 14 years older than she is,
mm,
and so she was just a kid, and so every year on her spring break or in the summer, we would go on an adventure and we would go save sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico, or we would go watch the um, walruses and the sea lions mate in Big Sur and surf. And we would go dove shipwrecks in the Apostle Islands, and we panned for gold in the Yukon. And
oh,
we would take 10 days, 2 weeks, and we would always have an adventure that was supposed to be a learning experience.
hmm
It was supposed to be something that I could justify taking her out of school for
hmm
one thing.
hmm
And for another thing, I wanted her to know that life is an adventure
mm,
and that you're not just learning about stuff, you're experiencing stuff.
hmm
And so we would do that. And when I finished my first 3 novels, which are biopics, and I, by the way, my partner Kate is an attorney, and she practiced 40 years in the New York, Southern District of New York
mm.
as a public defender.
Oh, wow, the stories she must have. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah, I keep telling her I got to sit down and write some of those, but she won't have any of it. But what she said is that even though those books are published and on the shelf, and nobody will probably ever read them, you still have to say that it's only partially autobiographical because apparently the statute of limitations doesn't expire on certain crimes,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how long.
hmm
So I have to say that they are semi-autobiographical. And anyway, when I had finished those, I was done writing. I had never written anything until I was 68 years old, and I was done. I had written what I wanted to write,
Mhm.
and there's a story behind why I wanted to write those. But my daughter said, "No, Dad, you got to keep writing because the stuff that you write is good."
Hmm.
See, she obviously doesn't know what she's talking about already. Um, and I said, "Well, what do you want me to write about?" And she said, "Well, I don't know, write about us." And I
Hmm.
said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Write about our adventures." And so I said, "Oh, yeah, what are we gonna?" I said, "It's gonna be like a travel guide. That'll be boring as hell." And she said, "No, no, make it magical. Make it about, you know, something interesting. Make it a treasure hunt." So that's how Annie Abbott was born. Was I started writing about this young girl who was 13, 14 years, 12, 13 or 14 years old,
Hmm.
who just had discovered what a magical person she is. And her dad uh, takes on trying to educate her because she suddenly discovered she has magical powers.
Hmm.
And with these magical powers, they're starting to manifest as she slowly approaches her puberty and becomes a true witch, a real witch. So it turns out he'd known all along, and he takes her on an adventure that's designed to teach her how to handle her magic. So they go and they meet druids and they meet witches and but in every place that they go, it's a place where Isabel and I went on our adventures.
Hmm.
And so I can use the things that I know, like
Right.
we were talking about early on. I
Yep.
can paint the scenery because I walked through that scenery.
Hmm.
And so it makes it much easier to tell a story when you remember what the woodwork feels like.
Wow. So true. Well, those two books, I've read both of them, are Annie Abbott and the Druid Stones and Annie Abbott and the Race to the Red Queen by Isabel and Michael Nelson. And I just love those books so much. All right, so I want to ask you a little bit about the mechanics of how you write your books. Like, when do you write? How much do you write at one time? Are you disciplined? I know you mentioned that you're in a writer's block right now, which is something that everyone faces. I faced it recently too, and I face it frequently. What do you do when you're in that state? And when you're not blocked, what's your like writing habit kind of?
See,
Oops, I
when
lost,
I'm
I lost your audio for a minute. Okay, there you are. Yeah, I can hear you again now.
said, oh dear,
Oh,
it's easier to talk about when I'm writing than it is when I'm not. When
okay.
I'm, I always feel like I should be writing, which contributes to writer's block
Mhm.
when, uh, my tendency is to write myself into a corner and then spend some time puzzling about the best way to work myself back out of that corner. When I'm in a groove and I'm writing, there's no limit to how I can write. I can write 8 or 10,000 words
A day?
a day,
Oh my goodness.
and
Wow.
that's a long day.
Wow.
I have been known to write all night, and I will put on my headphones. I'll put in some heavy metal music, and I'll blow my brains out with the music, and I'll let that be the soundtrack for the story. And I'll just write, and I'll write, and I'll write to get it down. Of course, you know how that is.
Oh,
You
yeah.
write, you get it down, you
Hmm.
let it percolate for a couple of days. You go back and read it. You
Hmm.
either tear it up, you erase it, or you correct it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
when I'm in the groove like that, um, Annie Abbott, The Annie Abbott books took me not even 3 months
Oh, wow. Okay.
from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes the editing and the publishing.
Wow. And how did that work between you and your daughter? Did you take certain characters and she wrote certain characters or like alternating chapters?
No, I wish that were true. That would help me with my writer's block. But um, she does all of the research.
Okay.
For instance, in the second book, they talk about the Sphinx
Mm-hmm.
and the Sphinx riddle that has to be solved. And I could have looked it up, but what I do is I write a section and I send it to her, and she does all the edits on it and then the suggestions, and then she'll send it back to me with footnotes about, this should really be this, or historically, this is better than this, and this is really what the Sphinx is about, and that sort of. So she did all the research, all the editing, and then she also, her word is the last word on whether things stay in the book or not.
Mm, okay. All
And
right.
so, and so that's her that's her niche. She lives in Atlanta, and of course, I live in Wisconsin, and so um, we do a lot of this back and forth, back and forth.
Mhm.
Um, but she's great. She writes poetry, and
Mm,
she's very, very good.
mm. Wow. All right, so I think we have time for just one more question. I wanted to ask you kind of stepping back and thinking holistically at your relationship to writing. What would you say is your singular purpose as an author, and what do you want to leave readers with after they read your books in general?
That's a really good question. Um, and I've got a really good answer for you. I think and I apologize if my answers are overly long. I don't mean for them to be.
Oh, they're perfect.
Um, every single one of us has a story to tell. We've all been there. We've all done that. We all have made our lives. And when I first started writing, um, I wrote because my dad would never talk to me about his life. And then at the end of his life, he gave me his diary.
Mm,
And he kept a diary of all the missions that he flew over Germany during World War II as a tail gunner on a B-17 bomber with
mm,
a life expectancy of 5 missions. And he flew 26. And I had never known that about him. And if I had known him from that point of view, I might have had a different relationship with him than I ended up having.
mhm,
And I didn't want that to happen. So I started writing little short chapters about something that happened in my life or something that happened before I had children so that they would understand maybe why I act like I do or why I think the way that I do and that sort of thing. And one book turned into 2 books, and 2 books turned into 3 books. And so I wrote because I wanted my kids to know who I was.
mhm,
And what I think everybody should be aware of the fact that we don't take the time to pass the lore on, not the truths and not you don't do that, or, if you do that, bad things will happen or stuff like that. But to tell them why you do things the way that you do them. Why is it important that you do things the way you do them? And pass on the lore. Not the stories about how Grandma Peter pants at the dinner table on Easter Sunday or anything like that, but stories about what you did that you experienced that will add to the information backlog that we start to accumulate as we grow up.
mm,
And so for me, writing, speaking in public, and everything like that is me leaving my legacy so that people know who I am. And we need to encourage more people to do that, more people to tell their stories, more people to tell how I got here in the first place, because it's important. We're all heroes. Every one of us is a hero to someone else in our life. And those stories are worth hearing. So that's why I write.
Thank you for that, Mike. That really hits the core purpose of what we're doing here right now, of me starting this series. That's really what I was looking for. So thank you so much. You can find Mike's books at michaeldeezebooks.com. And Mike, do you have a copy of Deathbed Confessions that you can hold up? I didn't ask you that beforehand. I'll flash it on the screen. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah, because it's not handy.
Okay. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful to chat with you. And for those of you tuning in today, thank you so much. Have fun reading Deathbed Confessions by Michael Deeze, and we will see you next time.